Ukraine's second largest city of Kharkiv, with a population of around 1.4 million, has been at the center of Russia's military aggression this week. Now on Tuesday, the city came under heavy missile strikes. In the aftermath of the bombardments, Kharkiv's residents helped emergency service workers take dead bodies out of the damaged buildings. Dead bodies were seen on the streets. Eyewitness videos showed wrecked buildings with no windows, fallen trees, power lines. The head of the local hospital said that many children were also injured. The hospital, which also serves as the bomb shelter, was damaged in the shockwave.
Вон попадание вот туда вот, завод. Взрывной волной вынесло все Киев. Все к чертовой матери. Вот все, что я могу сказать. Есть раненые, тяжело раненые. Из этих тяжело раненых есть двое детей, которых отвезли в больницу. Но персонал, местное население, общими усилиями мы все это сделали.
Missiles struck the very heart of the city in the Freedom Square, just outside the regional administration offices of Kharkiv. Video footage showed a missile hitting the local government building and then exploding, causing a massive fireball. At least 10 people were killed, 35 wounded in the strikes. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky accused Russia of war crimes for bombing the city.
Shelling into the central square is blatant, unconcealed terror. No one will forgive. No one will forget. The strike against Kharkiv is a war crime. This is state terrorism on the part of Russia. After this, Russia is obviously a terrorist state, and it must be official.
The regional head of Kharkiv said on Tuesday that the city's defense was holding despite Russia launching cruise missiles against the city. In the city of Zhytomyr, located in the northern Ukraine,
It's too late, my dear colleagues, to speak about de-escalation. Too late. The Russian president declared the war on the record. Should I play the video of your president? Ambassador, shall I do that right now, or you can't confirm it? Do not interrupt me, please. Thank you.
And don't ask me questions when you are speaking. Proceed with your statement.
Anyway, you declared the war. It is the responsibility of this body to stop the war. So I call on every one of you to do everything possible to stop the war.
This isn't called a war, this is called a special military operation in the Donbass.
Relinquish your duties as a chair. Call Putin, call Lavrov to stop aggression. And I welcome the decision of some members of this council to meet as soon as possible to consider the necessary decision that would condemn the aggression that you launch on my people. There is no purgatory for war criminals. They go straight to hell, Ambassador.
I wanted to say in conclusion that we aren't being aggressive against the Ukrainian people, but against the junta that is in power in Kiev. There are no more speakers on the list. This meeting is adjourned.
You've seen the situation in Ukraine, you've seen how the world is responding. Now let me show you how the world is covering this invasion. I'm talking about the media, especially Western channels. How are they covering Russia's invasion? With blatant racism. Let me say something at the outset. As journalists, we do not filter hardships and pain. We do not see caste, color, or gender. And we have stuck by this principle. When the Taliban stormed Kabul, we stood with Afghans. When Ethiopia attacked its own people, we questioned them. When unarmed black teenagers were gunned down in the US, we joined the outrage. Today we are doing the same. We see the plight of the Ukrainian people and we have reported on their hardships. But what about the Western media? They too are reporting on the crisis, on the war, on the refugees. But they do not see hardships. They only see race, the color of your skin, the color of your hair. Let me show you exhibit number 1. This exchange happened on the BBC, the so-called Guardian of Unbiased Reportage. Listen to how their panel describes the refugees from Ukraine.
It's really emotional for me because I see European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed.
People with blue eyes and blonde hair. That is why the so-called expert on the BBC is emotional, not because the people are homeless, not because their country is being invaded, but because their hair is blonde. On social media, a lot of people are defending the BBC. They say it's a guest, not their anchor. Let me take you back to September last year. Another guest was speaking on the very same channel, South Asian expert Christine Fair. She called out Pakistan's links with the Taliban. Do you remember what the BBC presenter did? She shut her down. She said it was violating the channel's unbiased coverage. So exposing terror links is a violation. Blatant racism and white supremacy is fine. Gold standard indeed. Now for exhibit number 2, NBC News from the US. Listen to this.
These are not refugees from Syria. These are Christians, they're white, they're very similar.
Very similar to us. How so? Because the Syrian refugees are Muslims, their skin is darker, their hair is not blonde. So Europe does not want them. And remember, this is not being said at some white supremacy cult. This is happening on live television. Exhibit number 3, CBS News, another American broadcaster. Their reporter is appalled by the war, not because there is death and destruction, but because it is happening in Europe.
Now, like Iraq or Afghanistan, this is a relatively civilized, relatively European city where you wouldn't expect that or hope that it's going to happen.
So Iraq and Afghanistan are uncivilized countries. Their people are uncultured. Their regimes are irresponsible. So they deserve war. They deserve hundreds of bombs and years of occupation. What about Ukraine? According to CBS, no. Ukraine does not deserve war or hardships because Ukraine is civilized. And now for the final exhibit. This one is not from the West. It is from Al Jazeera in Qatar. This anchor simply cannot comprehend the idea of European refugees.
What's compelling is just looking at them, the way they're dressed. These are prosperous, I would have to use the expression, these are prosperous middle-class people. These are not, obviously, refugees trying to get away from areas in the Middle East that are still in a big state of war. These are not people trying to get away from areas in North Africa. They look like any European family that you would live next door to.
That reporter is confused about the refugees. They look middle class. They look like something so bad happening to them. Well, this is what systemic racism looks like. Do you remember the 2015 refugee crisis? Around 1.3 million people sought asylum in Europe. Most of them were from Syria, Afghanistan, and Nigeria. Do you remember how the West reacted? They shut their borders, they herded the refugees like cattle, and they branded them as terrorists. Back then, Western reportage was quite different. Let me show you what the BBC did. They prepared 7 charts depicting the refugee crisis. Let's focus on chart number 5. Which European countries are most affected? West Asia. The bombs were dropping on West Asia, but this was the BBC's big concern. Which European countries are most affected? Now, just to be clear, we welcome what Europe is doing to host Ukrainian refugees. They deserve all the help. Our question is, why just Ukraine? Ukraine is not a member of the European Union. It is not part of NATO. So what explains this level of assistance? Racism. You see, Ukrainians are Europeans, hence they get the red carpet, but Africans and Asians get border crackdowns and refugee camps. Western media is part of the problem, I have to say. They reflect the public mentality, their sense of European supremacy. And the problem is, governments are not doing anything to help. In fact, they're adding fuel to this fire. Let me show you what Bulgaria's Prime Minister said about refugees. I'm quoting. These people are intelligent. They are educated people. This is not the refugee wave we have been used to. People we were not sure about their identity. People with unclear pasts who could have been even terrorists. That was a European head of state. He's openly calling West Asian refugees terrorists. If this does not expose Western hypocrisy, nothing does. They invaded Asian and African countries, they waged war, they committed war crimes, and when the people fled, they shut their borders. What does this tell you? That refugees were never the problem. That money or borders were not the issue. The issue was race. Think about it. WION is now available in your country. Download the app. That's because financial penalties are being imposed on Russia. And they've started disrupting the country's economy. The Moscow Stock Exchange has been shut for 2 days now. Investors are divesting themselves of Russian interests. The government's borrowing, the borrowing costs of the Russian government have doubled to 17%. The S&P Credit Agency has downgraded Russia to junk status. And to make this economic blowback worse, a number of multinationals are severing ties with Moscow. This includes energy companies, tech giants, banks, production houses, sporting bodies. A host of them have decided to suspend operations in Russia. JP Morgan says if this trend continues, Russia could soon enter a recession. Here's a report.
Today, I'm authorizing additional strong sanctions and new limitations on what can be exported to Russia.
And the Russian leadership will face unprecedented isolation.
We are now progressing on the second phase of those financial sanctions.
Les sanctions portées à la Russie seront à la hauteur de l'agression dont elle se rend coupable.
We will weaken Russia's economic base and its capacity to modernize.
日本はプーチン大統領を含むロシア政府関係者
With new financial measures, we're taking new powers to target Russian finance.
As attacks continue in Ukraine and Russian forces press their advance, the West has unveiled a series of sanctions. To deprive Putin of the funds he needs for this war, they've targeted Russian banks, oligarchs, businesses, oil refineries, and military exports. These financial penalties have already disrupted the Moscow Stock Exchange and sent the Russian currency cratering more than 30%. A sharper economic fallout is expected in the days ahead. JP Morgan says Russia could even enter a recession. To make this economic blowback worse, the corporate world is also severing ties with Russia. A host of multinational companies have taken some big steps. If we speak of oil companies, energy giant Shell has decided to exit all Russian operations, including its partnership with Russia's state-owned Gazprom. Norwegian energy firm Equinor is also divesting its joint ventures in Russia almost 30 years ago. If we speak of tech giants, Dell has suspended all product sales in Russia. Intel is suspending chip shipments to Russia. Facebook parent company Meta has barred Russian ads on its website. Twitter, too, has restricted access to Russian handles in Europe. And Google has banned Russian state media from collecting ad money from its websites, apps, and YouTube videos. Then we have financial institutions. British bank HSBC is winding down relations with several Russian banks. The New York Stock Exchange has temporarily suspended trading for Russian companies. Nasdaq, too, has barred Russian-owned firms from trading on its exchanges. The list doesn't end there. FIFA and UEFA have barred Russia from all international competitions. The IOC has banned both Russian and Belarusian athletes from competing. Formula One has cancelled this year's Russian Grand Prix. Transport giants FedEx and UPS have suspended their shipments to Russia. America's Delta Airlines has halted its alliance with Russia's Aeroflot. Disney has paused theatrical releases of its films in Russia. Netflix has suspended its streaming of all its services. And singing competition Eurovision will not allow any Russian acts this year. Even the president of Russia hasn't been spared. In 2013, he was conferred with an honorary black belt by World Taekwondo. The organization has now stripped him of this honor. It has also refused to recognize any Taekwondo events in Russia henceforth. Now, here's the thing. Some of these measures may be purely symbolic. They may not inflict serious economic damages on Russia, but they send a message to Moscow that there can be no place for such naked aggression in today's world.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.
وش ذا الجو الزين؟ لكم انا المكان جامد. اي والله توفقنا. الحليب جاهز.
वो एक शेर है ना, यूं रो रो के तुम अशकों की आबरू न गवा, घर की बात घर ही में रहे तो अच्छा. और मेरा ख्याल है 23 मार्च के लॉन्ग मार्च पे वो सोचेंगे. वो इसी कॉन्फ्रेंस हो रही है 22 और 23 को, और यहाँ तारीखी परेड होती है. जैसी J10C, उस वक्त मैं J20C को भी देख चुका हूँ, और पहली दफ़ा 23 मार्च को J10C की 25 जहाज़ों का स्क्वाड्रन फ्लाइंग पास कर रहा है, जिसे पाकिस्तान की कौम बड़े दिल और मोहब्बत से देखना चाहती है, क्योंकि ये हमारी दफ़ाई है. और इसमें रेंजर्स, FC, पाक फौज सब लोग इस दिन को मना रहे हैं, और मुझे उम्मीद है कि 23 पूरा वो आगे भी ले जा सकते हैं. और ये जो अरबों रुपया करके अपना बलावत जो है लगा आ रहा है, आने में इस्लामाबाद में ठीक होगा. और 24 साल बाद पाकिस्तान में ऑस्ट्रेलिया की क्रिकेट टीम आई है, और ये इस गवर्नमेंट को बहुत बड़ा क्रेडिट जाता है. न्यूजीलैंड को हिंदुस्तान ने साजिश करके और ऐसे मैसेजेस दे के और ऐसे टेक्स्ट मैसेजेस करके न्यूजीलैंड का दौरा नाकाम किया. इंशाअल्लाह ताला न्यूजीलैंड के इसके ऑस्ट्रेलिया के बाद लंदन की टीम भी आएगी, और पाकिस्तान एक क्रिकेट लवर कंट्री है, और सारी दुनिया में इसका एक बहुत अच्छा मैसेज आएगा. 3 क्वेश्चन हो सकते.
शेख रशीद तकरीब से खिताब कर रहे थे, जबकि शाह महमूद कुरैशी इस वक्त नवाब शाह में न्यूज़ कॉन्फ्रेंस कर रहे हैं.
15 साल का 3000 काम के 3 साल का लेते हैं. मांगो हमसे, मांगो. फिर कह रहे हैं मैं जा रहा हूँ. मेरी जेब में कल कहा उन्हें खैरपुर में, मेरी जेब में अदम एतमाद की तहरीक है. बिस्मिल्लाह बिस्मिल्लाह, उसको जेब से बाहर निकालिए ना. आप कह रहे हैं कि अदम एतमाद की तहरीक तो आपकी कल शाम को हवा निकल गई. जिन क्यू लीग के भाइयों के पास आप गए थे, उन्होंने जवाब दे दिया. उन्होंने कहा हम इमरान खान के साथ खड़े हैं, हम जबान वाले लोग हैं, हमने वादा किया है, कमिटमेंट की है, हम कमिटमेंट निभाएंगे. साहिबजादे ने पहले कह दिया था, मोनिस ने, और बुजुर्गों ने कल कह दिया जब खान गए उनके घर, तबादला ख्याल हुआ, बड़ी अच्छी गुफ्तगू हुई. तो उनकी तो हवा कल निकल गई गुब्बारे से. अब दूसरे साहब कहते हैं कि जी असेंबली का इजलास नहीं बुला रहे. चलो फर्ज कीजिए, आप देखिए पढ़े लिखे लोग बैठे हैं, हम इजलास नहीं बुला रहे. हमारी नीयत पे चलो 2 मिनट के लिए शक कर लीजिए, हमारी नीयत ठीक नहीं होगी, हम इजलास से कतरा रहे हैं. आप रेगुलेशन क्यों नहीं कर लेते? रेगुलेशन कर लो ना, आईनी इख्तियार है. रेगुलेशन करके इजलास बुला लो और अपनी अदम बात की तहरीक जमा करा दो ना. रुकावट किसकी है? नंबर्स नहीं है, फरेब कर रही है, धोखा दे रही है, यकसुई नहीं है. नून के दोस्त फौरी इंतखाब इंतखाबात चाहते हैं, पीपल्स पार्टी फॉर इंतखाब नहीं चाहती। देखिए पीपल पार्टी इंतखाब अगर नारा लग रहा है वजीर आजम बिलावल, 5% मकबूलियत है पंजाब में बिलावल की, वजीर आजम कैसे बनेगा? फिर समझाओ ना यार, क्या सिर्फ इंटीरियर सिंध की सीटों में बनेगा? खैबर पख्तूनख्वा में आप नहीं हो, पंजाब में आप नहीं हो, बलूचिस्तान में आप नहीं हो, कराची में आप नहीं हो, तो वजीर आजम कैसे बनोगे? अगर वोटों से बनना है कोई और फॉर्मूला तो मुझे मालूम नहीं। अगर वोटों का फॉर्मूला है तो इस फॉर्मूले से तो बेटा तुम नहीं बनते, फिलहाल नहीं बनते। अभी कुछ सीखो, कुछ सबक सीखो, कुछ पढ़ो, कुछ तजर्बा हासिल करो। रातों रात अब जब पौधा लगाते हैं ना, तो पहले साल पौधा अगर आम का भी पेड़ लगाए तो फल नहीं देता, उसको भी वक्त लगता है भाई यार। अभी आपको वक्त लगेगा, अभी आपको वक्त लगेगा। लिखी लिखाई फिर माथे सिखा देते हैं, आप पढ़ देते हो, बोल देते हो, ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं, अच्छी बात है, कैसे आदमी सीखते हैं। सो मैं ये अर्ज करना चाह रहा था, पहली तो बात ये है, अब इंशाअल्लाह हम अपनी मंजिल की तरफ रवा दवा है। और मैं जो देख रहा हूँ, जो मैंने लाड़काना में देखा परसों रात और कल रात जो मैंने नवाब शाह में देखा,